Everyone thought they had lost their minds. China began burying millions of tons of dead grass and straw into the scorching sands of the Gobi Desert. It looked like a ritual, or maybe a desperate attempt to hide something. The internet went wild with theories. Were they covering up ancient ruins? Was it a secret underground bunker system? The official story was reforestation, but the critics laughed. They said you can't fight a desert that eats cities for breakfast. But 10 years later, a satellite image beamed back to Earth changed everything. What emerged from the sand wasn't just trees. It was something that defied logic. The day the sky turned black. Let's be real for a second. The Gobi Desert isn't just a dry place. It is a monster. For centuries, the locals have called the sandstorms the Yellow Dragon. And this isn't just a poetic name. When this thing wakes up, it blocks out the sun. In the mid-20th century, this dragon was hungry. It was expanding at a terrifying speed, swallowing up about 1,400 square miles of land every single year. To put that into perspective, imagine a chunk of land the size of a major city just vanishing off the map every 12 months. Poof! Gone and buried under drifting dunes that could be hundreds of feet high. It was terrifying. Villages that had stood for hundreds of years were suddenly abandoned. People would wake up in the morning to find sand blocking their front doors. A few days later, the sand was up to the windows. A month later, the roof was gone. But here is where things get weird. The speed of the desertification was so fast that people started asking questions. Was this natural? Some wild theories started floating around in the deep corners of the internet and among the superstitious locals. Some whispered that it was an ancient curse, payback for disturbing the tombs of the Silk Road. Others, wearing tin-foil hats, suggested that maybe it was the result of secret weather experiments gone wrong during the Cold War. The timing was suspicious to some. The expansion of the desert seemed to accelerate right as industrialization kicked into high gear. Was the Earth fighting back? Or was something else triggering this collapse? The panic was real. The sandstorms were traveling thousands of miles. Dust from the Gobi was being found in the lungs of people in Japan, and even as far away as the west coast of the United States. The government knew they had a catastrophe on their hands. If they didn't stop the sand, Beijing, the capital city, would eventually be buried. It sounded like the plot of a disaster movie, but the math checked out. The desert was only a few hundred miles away and closing in fast. So, in 1978, they launched the 3 North Shelter Belt program. The name is boring, I know, but the ambition was insane. They wanted to build a wall of trees stretching 2,800 miles. That is longer than the Great Wall of Stone. The goal was to lock the desert in a cage of wood and leaves, but almost immediately things felt off. The scale of the mobilization was military. Millions of farmers, soldiers, and students were ordered to the front lines. They weren't carrying guns, they were carrying shovels. They dug millions of holes. They planted millions of trees, and this is where the mystery deepened. Why were they rushing? Why were they planting trees in places where everyone knew trees couldn't grow? It felt frantic. Some observers speculated that maybe the government wasn't just trying to stop the sand. Maybe they were trying to hide something. The desert is a great place to bury secrets, after all. Imagine the scene. Endless trucks rolling into the wasteland, dumping mysterious cargo, men digging in the middle of nowhere. If you were watching from a spy satellite, it looked suspicious as hell. Was it really just trees? Or were they building a massive underground network? The official story never changed. It was just a green wall. But the way they went about it, the secrecy, the speed, the sheer desperation, fed the rumor mill for decades. But here is the catch. Nature doesn't care about your plans, your secrets, or your politics. You can plant 1 billion trees, but if the land wants to be a desert, it will stay a desert. And that is exactly what happened. The first wave of this project was a disaster of biblical proportions. And then, the trees started screaming. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Nature's brutal revenge. So, here is the deal. In the 80s and 90s, China went all in on the brute force method. They thought, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of saplings, Let's just overwhelm the desert. They planted poplars and willows everywhere. These are fast-growing trees. They look good quickly. It was great for photo ops. The newspapers ran headlines about the green miracle. But nature was about to pull the rug out from under them. These trees were thirsty. Like, really thirsty. And the Gobi Desert is, well, a desert. It has no water. So, what did the trees do? They dug their roots deep, sucking up the ancient groundwater that had been stored deep in the earth for thousands of years. They drained the aquifer, and then they died. It happened in waves. Massive forests, covering thousands of acres, suddenly turned brown and brittle. The locals called them ghost forests. It was a spooky sight. Miles and miles of dead gray trunks standing in the shifting sands, whistling in the wind. It looked like a graveyard. This is when the wild theories really kicked into high gear. People started saying, "See? It's a cover-up." The internet forums lit up with ideas. Some said the trees were dying because of radiation leaking from underground testing sites. Others said the government was actually testing biological agents that eliminated the plants. The craziest theory? Some people claimed the ghost forests were actually antennas for a massive ELF, extremely low frequency, communication system for submarines, disguised as trees. I know it sounds nuts, but when you looked at the satellite photos, the rows of dead trees looked strangely geometric. It fed the paranoia. But the reality was actually worse than the conspiracies. The reality was that human arrogance had broken the ecosystem. By planting these thirsty trees, they had actually made the desert drier. The native grasses that used to hold the soil together died because the trees stole all the water. So when the trees died, there was nothing left. The sand came back with a vengeance. The international community laughed. Western scientists wrote papers mocking the effort. They called it the Great Green Lie. They said China was just burying money in the sand. They said you cannot terraform Earth. They said the project was doomed to fail and that the desert would eventually swallow Beijing, just as predicted. And honestly, it looked like they were right. The sandstorms got worse. In the early 2000s, a massive storm hit Beijing that turned the sky completely orange. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It felt apocalyptic. People were walking around in gas masks. The yellow dragon was roaring louder than ever. It seemed like the end of the road. The project was bleeding money. The ecological damage was severe. The critics were gloating. But get this. While the world was laughing and the conspiracy theorists were typing away in their basements, a small group of engineers and farmers were out in the middle of nowhere, trying something completely different. They weren't using high-tech gadgets. They weren't using secret weapons. They were using trash. Specifically, corn stalks, wheat straw, and rice husks. Agricultural waste. They had discovered something accidental in a place called Shapoto decades earlier. They found that if you laid straw in a certain pattern, the wind stopped. It sounds like magic. How can a piece of dry grass stop a 50-mile-per-hour wind? It's not that simple, though. It wasn't just throwing straw on the ground. It was geometry. They found that circles didn't work. Lines didn't work. But squares? Squares were the key. But nobody knew that these squares were about to unlock a hidden code in nature. The secret that saved the railroad. Let's dive into the magic squares. This is where the story turns from a disaster movie into a sci-fi mystery. The engineers discovered that a grid of 1 meter by 1 meter was the perfect size. Not 2 meters, not half a meter, 1 meter. Why? Nobody is entirely sure why that specific dimension interacts so perfectly with the wind physics of the Gobi, but it creates a vortex that cancels out the wind's energy at ground level. It's almost like a cheat code for physics. So, they started the straw checkerboard project. This wasn't done by machines. It was done by hand. Imagine an army of people wrapping their faces in scarves to breathe, hiking out into dunes that look like mountains. They carry heavy bundles of straw. They lay the straw flat, then take a shovel and punch the middle of the straw deep into the sand. The ends of the straw stick up, creating a little fence about 6 inches high. Then they do it again and again. Millions of times. From the sky, it looked insane. The desert started to look like a giant sheet of graph paper. the golden straw against the yellow sand. Now, you might be thinking, it's just straw. Won't it blow away? That's the crazy part. The friction of the sand holds it in place. And once the grid is there, the sand inside the square stops moving. It becomes still. And when the sand is still, a crust forms on top. And here is the wildest part: the algae theory. Some scientists believe that these grids didn't just stop the wind. They believe the grids actually trapped ancient spores floating in the air, cyanobacteria, the stuff that originally created oxygen on Earth billions of years ago. People started whispering that the government wasn't just planting straw. They were seeding the desert with genetically modified superalgae to create a biological crust instantly. There were rumors of planes flying at night, spraying mysterious green mist over the straw grids. Whether it was superalgae or just nature doing its thing, a biological soil crust began to form inside the squares. This crust is alive. It's a mix of moss, lichen, and bacteria. It acts like a skin for the desert. It holds water. It captures nitrogen from the air. Suddenly, the sand wasn't dead anymore. It was a petri dish. Inside these protected squares, they planted the real solution. Not the thirsty poplars of the past. They planted weird alien-looking shrubs. Saxaul, sea buckthorn, carragana. These plants are beasts. The Saxaul tree looks like a dead stick for most of the year, but its roots can go down dozens of feet to find water. And it doesn't just drink water, it holds the sand in a vice grip. But the work was brutal. We are talking about temperatures that can fry an egg on a rock in the summer and freeze your eyelids shut in the winter. The workers lived in tents. They drank brackish water. They were isolated from the world. And of course, the rumors persisted. With so many people working in such remote areas, stories of discoveries started to leak out. Did they find ancient cities buried under the dunes? The Silk Road ran right through here. There were whispers of workers finding gold, jade, and even ancient manuscripts, which were quickly whisked away by men in black SUVs. Did it happen? Who knows? But it added to the mystique. The Green Wall wasn't just an environmental project, it was a treasure hunt. But while the internet was obsessing over lost treasure, the real treasure was starting to sprout. The straw grids held, the shrubs survived. The ghost forests were being replaced by a low, scrubby, resilient jungle. And then, they brought in the tech. This wasn't just shovels anymore. We are talking about drones. Swarms of drones mapping every inch of the dunes to calculate the perfect angle for the straw. We are talking about robot planters that looked like Mars rovers, crawling over the dunes and punching straw into the ground 24/7. It started to look like a terraforming operation on another planet. But the strangest thing was what happened to the rain. Greening the gray zone. For years, people have accused superpowers of trying to control the weather. HARP, chemtrails, cloud seeding. You've heard the conspiracies. Well, when the Gobi Desert started getting wetter, the conspiracy boards lit up red hot. China has a weather machine. They are stealing rain from India. The truth? It is sort of a weather machine, but it's made of plants. See, huge areas of bare sand reflect heat back into the atmosphere. This creates a high-pressure system that pushes rain clouds away. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of dryness. But when you cover that sand with millions of acres of vegetation, the ground absorbs the heat. The plants release moisture through transpiration. This cools the air. The pressure drops, and suddenly, clouds can form. So, they effectively hacked the local climate. But they used biology, not lasers. In 1929, NASA released data that proved the skeptics wrong. The satellites showed that the Earth was getting greener, and a huge chunk of that was coming from China. The green wall was visible from space. It was a dark green scar across the yellow Earth. And get this. The economy started booming in the middle of the desert. Remember those weird shrubs they planted? It turns out some of them are gold mines. Take the cistanche plant. It's a parasite that grows on the roots of the Saxaul tree. It looks like a pine cone, but it's a flower. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's known as desert ginseng. It's supposed to boost your immune system, give you energy, and, well, let's just say it's popular with men. Suddenly, farmers who were dirt poor were harvesting this stuff and selling it for a fortune. the sand industry was born. They weren't just saving the planet, they were getting rich. They built massive solar farms in the middle of the recovered land. But these aren't normal solar farms. They are raised high off the ground. Why? So they can grow crops underneath. The solar panels shade the plants from the harsh sun, and the plants keep the dust off the panels. It's a symbiotic relationship between robots and nature. From a distance, these solar farms look like vast, glittering oceans. Some people driving through the desert reported seeing alien cities on the horizon. It was just millions of solar panels, but the scale is hard to comprehend. And let's not forget the rice in the desert rumors. Scientists actually developed a strain of rice that can grow in dry, salty sand. There are now rice paddies in the middle of the desert. If you tell someone that, they will think you are crazy, but it's real. The critics were silent. The green lie had become the green miracle. The dust storms in Beijing dropped significantly. The air was cleaner, but there is always a but. Changing an ecosystem this fast is dangerous. You are playing God. Some ecologists are now worried about new problems. Are we attracting invasive species? Are we altering the global wind patterns? There is a theory called the butterfly effect. If you stop the dust from blowing off the Gobi, that dust doesn't reach the Pacific Ocean. That dust contains iron, which feeds the plankton in the ocean. If the plankton die, the fish die. So, by saving the desert, are we eliminating the ocean? It's a terrifying thought. And it's one that scientists are arguing about right now behind closed doors. And then, the animals came back. But they were different. The future is green and scary. The animals returned, but not just the cute ones. Wolves, eagles, foxes, and wild rumors started again. Farmers reported seeing animals that shouldn't be there. Exotic species. Some claimed the government was releasing genetically modified animals to test the new ecosystem. Superwolves that could survive without water for days, most likely. It's just nature finding a way. When you build a forest, life comes, even if that forest is artificial. But the ecosystem is weird. It's a mix of native desert animals and forest animals that have migrated in. It's a Frankenstein ecosystem, a hybrid. We are seeing birds nesting in trees that were planted by drones. We are seeing deer grazing on grass that was genetically selected in a lab. So, what is the verdict? China did the impossible. They stopped a moving desert. They proved that humans can repair the damage we do to the earth. They turned a sea of death into a vineyard, a solar farm, and a forest. But the lesson here isn't just technology saves us. The lesson is humility. For years, this massive undertaking was defined by hubris. The project failed miserably when engineers attempted to conquer nature with industrial might and brute force, treating the encroaching desert like an enemy combatant that could be defeated with machinery. But the Gobi was relentless. It swallowed millions of saplings, buried concrete barriers, and laughed at their technology. The sand simply didn't care about their engineering. It kept moving, burying villages and choking the sky. The breakthrough didn't come from a high-tech lab or a billion-dollar machine. It only worked when they humbled themselves. They literally got down on their knees, not to pray, but to work with the earth. They stopped fighting the wind and started using simple, locally sourced straw. By manually pressing this straw into the sand in specific checkerboard patterns, they didn't try to stop the wind. They simply slowed it down just enough. It worked because they finally mimicked nature's own patterns. These simple grids trapped the shifting dunes, retained moisture, and created a micro-ecosystem where hardy plants could finally survive. A decade ago, international observers and environmental critics scoffed at this, calling it a futile vanity project destined to collapse. They aren't laughing anymore. Today, those same skeptics are booking flights to China, not to criticize, but to take notes. The Great Green Wall has evolved from a national experiment into the definitive survival guide for a warming planet. It is now the blueprint for the rest of the world. The nations of Africa are applying these exact checkerboard techniques to hold back the Sahara, and governments across the Middle East are looking to this model to save their own arable lands. They learned that you cannot beat the desert with force. You can only tame it with patience. But the mystery remains. We still don't fully understand the long-term consequences. Is the water table stable? Maybe not. Is the green wall fragile? Definitely. If we stop maintaining it, will the yellow dragon wake up and eat it all in a month? Probably. We are holding back a geological force with straw and determination. It's a fragile victory. And as for the wild theories? Well, the desert is vast. There are still millions of acres of sand that haven't been touched. Who knows what is really buried out there? Maybe the green wall isn't just keeping the sand out. Maybe it's keeping something else in. So, what do you think? Is this the greatest environmental victory in history? Or are we just setting ourselves up for a bigger disaster down the road? And do you believe the rumors about what they really found in the sand? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about the crazy things humans do to this planet, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.